and I'll start with the produce safety work group, and I'm just going to do this from my notes. I don't have slides. The approach again for this work group was we had an update from the PSA that Gretchen Wall provided. We had an update on a summary of the NECAP's pre-post test results for the PSA training. And we had a summary of on-farm readiness review evaluations, and then we had Andre Cantelmo from Heron Pond Farm provide some grower perspective based on experiences that he was able to solicit from other growers related to OFR, R, and farm inspections. We also had a presentation from Marianne Solomotis and Socrates Trujillo related to the Produce Safety Research Consortium, and some of the topics they're focused on and supporting research on to improve knowledge around some of the issues we're facing, as well as training and practice. Betsy and I then facilitated a whole room brainstorming session about what challenges still exist in terms of research. So what research questions may still exist, what educational approaches or resources should be developed, and then what are some of the practices, the on-farm practices that still remain to be improved or adopted. And then we had a voting activity based on that. We developed quite a list in those three buckets. And the voting sort of came down along the lines of, in terms of research questions, one, for example, was investigate financial incentives or disincentives of implementing food safety practices for worker, and some word that doesn't look familiar to me, for, wow, I don't know what that is. Food safety practices. Basically, the financial incentives or disincentives related to implementing food safety practices, especially as it relates to workers on farms. The point there is, we have crews are often paid by the piece, and produce safety activities or practices require more time, and so the piece rate will go down. So are there other incentives that should be explored? Another piece of this was looking at sort of the co-benefits of some of the produce safety practices, so quality benefit or efficiency benefits that come about because of produce safety practice adoption or investment. A second topic that came up for sort of future research questions was what are the risks of growing produce on soil or other surfaces, and a big part of this was drop produce, for example, and what is the true risk associated with that, and what are the definitions that would come out of that. Drooping versus dropped, for example, was brought up. There was a lot of interest in more research on hygienic design, for example, design elements, alternatives to foam rollers in wash pack lines. There was interest in research on a better understanding of cleaning and sanitizing efficacy in small farms, including drying practices, better defining what it means to provide thorough drying after cleaning and sanitizing. And there was a fifth research area exploring increases in shelf life, crop price, quality, employee satisfaction from implementing food safety practices, somewhat related to the first one. In terms of future education and training opportunities, one thing that was noted was, as we were talking about these research questions, every now and then, more often than not around the room, somebody would say, there's a paper on that, there's a paper on that, that study's being done. And so it became pretty clear that we're not all connected to all the same information, and so identifying ways of easing that connection, for example, a frequently asked questions doc that has some of these key research questions that might actually improve adoption or knowledge sharing, and pointing to the published paper, for example, or the educational resource that might help. Other educational opportunities, best practices for drying, tying into the research question. A guide on aquaponics and hydroponics, focused on food safety. A getting started guide for new farmers related to food safety for new farmers. I was reminded during Chelsea's presentation about the new resource from the LFSC for small farms. There probably is some alignment there. I'd be interested to see if there's anything specific to new farmers who may not be small farmers. And then there was another discussion related to education and training on washing techniques. For example, the concern around power washing and aerosolization as a result of that. So generally, there's a difference, sort of a spectrum of opinion on whether that's okay, and if it is okay, when and how and where. So understanding that a bit more. That would be my summary of a pretty active and wide-ranging conversation. Anybody else who is in this session want to pipe up? What'd I miss? Good enough? All right.